Welcome to the Spirit Room. This podcast is a gathering place for people in search of personal growth and life's higher meaning. I'm your host, Mike Consul. I also invite you to spend time on the Spirit Room website, where you'll find headlines about religion, spirituality, psychology, and the New Age movement. Just go to thespiritroom.org. Henry David Thoreau is a guy most often credited with variations of the aphorism, "Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and die with their songs still inside them." He wrote that in Walden. Then as now, or I should say now as then, there's an awful lot of quiet desperation. Back in Thoreau's day, men had plenty to do, women had plenty to do, and when you bring it into the contemporary, I think the quiet desperation that a lot of people are facing has to do with a lack of employment in many, many cases. We're seeing these dramatic changes in our economy, and a lot of people are losing their job to computers, to robotics, to software, to algorithms, automation. And when you stop and think about it, driverless cars and trucks alone in the not-too-distant future are expected to wipe out millions of professional driving jobs. Transportation companies can drastically cut their costs and have safer cars and trucks on the road. Most accidents, let's face it, are caused by human error, not because of mechanical failure. And sensors don't miss anything. They don't go to sleep. They don't text. They don't lose their concentration. Yeah, the point here is that people have lost their jobs, and that's going to continue to happen. And as a result of that, people have been sidelined. They've been sidelined by joblessness. So a lot of people end up going out looking for jobs, and they end up with a job that is much less than what they had before in terms of their responsibility and in terms of income. Some don't find jobs at all. And that's where this new quiet desperation is coming from, in large part. People's self-identity is very much tied up in what they do for a living. Who am I if I don't have a job? Who am I if I'm not earning some type of income? I'm one of those people who believe that we are actually going to have an economy one day that's almost entirely automated, and nations will be giving their citizens checks that they live on. Now, if you want to do more than that, if you want to make more of yourself, which most people, I think, would do, Americans are very hardworking people. If that was the case, then we'd have time to do the things that are really meaningful to us. But when I talk about a future of that type, a lot of people say, well, what would we do without work? They think it's corrosive for humanity not to have work. I think one of the reasons people feel that way is that we really don't have a sense of self. Why do we feel this quiet desperation? Why do we feel that we have to have a job of a certain status or a certain level of income for our lives to be meaningful? I would argue it's disintermediation with our higher power, with God. Most of us don't feel any sense of connection to the Supreme Being. Most of us don't see ourselves as something larger than simply what we do in the mortal human form. And I would argue most of us are very fearful, and that's why our song is still inside us when we die, as Henry David Thoreau suggests. How many times have we heard that a person wants to do something in their lives? They want to be a stand-up comic. They want to write a book. They want to be an actor. They dream of this, they dream of that, yet they're making no efforts to achieve it. Paralyzed by fear of success, paralyzed by fear of failure. What are we afraid of? What is causing this performance anxiety? Why are we afraid of success? We're afraid of success because success represents change. We're afraid of failure because it damages the self-esteem when we fail. Even though failure is essential to success, all it takes is one failure to cut a human being off at the knees and cause them to never even try again. And by the way, I should say that there are societies that already give their citizens checks. Societies where if you're a legitimate citizen of that society, you do not have to work for a living because you have an income. You have a basic living wage, or oftentimes more than that. I'm thinking of countries such as Saudi Arabia or Qatar. And what we're seeing today is that a country like the United States gets richer and richer, but that wealth redistribution just isn't there. There's wealth redistribution going on, but it's going to the top rather than the middle and the bottom. But inevitably, if we are not going to have jobs, then we have to restructure our economy so that we have income, so that everybody has the basic living wage that they need, and then whatever you are motivated to do beyond that, hallelujah. Now, having said all that, I would also point to the fact that highly successful people are often very miserable. They're often living lives of quiet or very loud and overt desperation. People's dreams do come true very often, only to find out that the thing that they dreamt of, the thing that they wanted so badly, the thing they thought would make them happy, does not fulfill them. It doesn't feed their soul. You know, Steve Martin wrote a terrific autobiography. In that book, he wrote about when he went to the top. He was sold out for like 2 years. He had gigs in places like Madison Square Garden for 2 years out. He was the biggest thing in comedy. But he said every night I was sitting alone in my hotel room. That's where I would return to. He was just alone. He was lonely, and he was unhappy. But when you listen to his stories of his life when he was on the way up, he was extremely happy. He wasn't a success yet. He hadn't hit it big, and he wasn't making great money, far from it. But he was happy because he was connected to people. One stage of his life in particular is Steve Martin and a partner who were working together in comedy, working to make it in comedy. I believe they were writing a comedy for programs, and they spent their whole day laughing together, working together, laughing together, having fun. It was the best time of his life. So that connectedness with human beings is almost a proxy for connectedness with God. But ultimately, we live this life alone. We go through our experiences alone. We can be with people and still be very lonely. Ultimately, we need that connection with our higher power. And when you stop and think about it, how much time do people spend each day, each week, even attempting to reach out for spiritual connection, for some type of sustenance from the spiritual dimension? How much time do we spend helping others in the name of God? Helping others as a spiritual practice? How much time do we spend alone, sitting quietly and reaching into our core, coming to terms with who we are? Not just as mortal beings, but as spiritual entities. We are not human beings having spiritual experiences. We are spiritual beings having human experiences. That's not an original statement. I don't recall who it originated with. But that's exactly the stage that we want to get to. We want to get to that stage where we experience in a real sense that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, rather than human beings constantly striving to taste the spiritual. That's a really easy statement to make and a very difficult concept to actualize. I get that. But if we're not at least framing our lives in that way, if we're not looking through the lens brightly, then we're diminished. Many of you have probably heard the saying, there's nothing wrong with the world except your attitude towards it, or your view of it. This is why framing is so important. Framing in our own minds, our own lives, the experiences that happen around us, and interpreting those experiences not to our detriment, but to our advantage. I'm not talking about self-delusion. I mean, this is, relatively speaking, the easy part. God realization, or connectedness with God, opening the third eye, seeing the divine light. That's the incredibly hard part. The thing that is relatively easy for us to do is to view life in a positive manner and put our lives in the proper context, to frame our lives in the proper way. Stop and think about a painting and how it, when you frame it, a painting can just come to life, can be accentuated with a great matting and framing job. Well, in the same way, our lives can be accentuated. I have an ex-wife who is forever interpreting things to her detriment. I used to tell her all the time, stop taking the events in your life and hurting yourself with them by interpreting them as something negative about you. There's more than one way to view the events in your life. But for whatever reason, she was more comfortable interpreting things to her detriment. There are people who are literally happy being unhappy. They prefer unhappiness. It's a more natural state of being for them. It's a more natural frame of mind. And trying to change that for some people is enormously difficult, if not impossible. We can do better. Look at your life as something you chose. You chose to be incarnated. You chose to enter the cosmic drama. You chose before birth to have the experiences that you're having. You chose to work out your karma in certain ways. Nobody's doing this to you. You accepted the assignment. You took the cup of poison and you agreed to drink it. When somebody says, why me? I say, why not you? When somebody says, why me? Because you chose it. So let's stop sniveling about it. Let's get on with it. You accepted the challenge. Now don't crumple under the weight of it. I mean, let's face it. The things that we count as problems are not problems for people in the rest of the world. If you're an American, if you live in one of the westernized societies of the world in a developed economy, your life is a fantasy to 80 or 90% of the people in the rest of the world. This is part of what I mean when I say put your life in context, frame it properly, understand that you chose to be here. It is the job of a lifetime. Literally, it is the job of a lifetime. And it's your responsibility and my responsibility to execute it with a level of expertise. It's our responsibility to get better at this as we go along. We all have our long, dark nights of the soul. We all have our periods of quiet desperation. We can't let our whole life turn into a life of quiet desperation. There should be nothing quiet about it. There should be nothing half-assed about it. We should be living life out loud. We should be seizing the day. This is what God requires of us. That's it for this episode. Ciao for now.